So all we're doing here is we're going to assemble the main wheels. They come in two parts, and I often find that these are some of the worst things for ghost seams to show up on. So in this instance, what we're going to be doing is using super glue. So I'm just sticking them to a couple of pieces of blue tack there, so that I ensure I keep my fingers away from the super glue as we're applying it. And it's really that simple. The parts come off fine with no real issues. And we're just doing a quick test fit. And then it's just using some super glue on a toothpick, running it around the inside edge. There's a ledge and recess on each side of these wheels to ensure that they align. So I'm just making sure there's plenty of super glue around that ledge for the other half to drop into, and then it's just picking it up and lining it up, and as you can see, just pushing them together. It's super glue, so it's pretty much an instant join. I will just use a little bit once they're together. I'll use a little bit of accelerator, just run around that join to ensure it sets instantly. Ensure you get a foam or plastic safe accelerator. Some of them aren't and will attack the plastic itself, which isn't what we want. This is foam safe accelerator, so it's absolutely fine for this job. And that's it, glued and accelerated. So that's now switching just to a sanding board there, just to sand the seam immediately after you've accelerated the super glue, because you've got about an hour before it really starts to harden off. So at the moment it's much like sanding the plastic, and then it's just a little bit of cleaning up with some Infini sanders, 800 and 1000 grit, sorry 600 and 1000 grit ones I used here, and a quick brush off, and that's it. Repeat for the other side, and that's that done. So that's the wheels done in a very few minutes without any problems at all, and we're now ready to move on. So I've glued the tanks together using exactly the same process, and I'm just using a knife to scrape away the excess set glue before it sets too hard, and a little bit of trimming like this will save a lot of sanding and possible removal of detail down the way. And then after it's been sanded, it's just running that knife blade around the detail there just to restore it, and I'll see what it looks like after I've primed that. It might need a bit of restoration, or that knife groove might be enough to make the restored detail look fine. And a little final polish just to knock off the edges from where those grooves have been cut with the knife. So we're finally ready to start putting a bit of paint on this, and this is just Mr. Colour 156 Super White. As usual, it's kind of getting a mixture between pressure and thinning ratio. What I want is it to go on reasonably heavy, but well atomized. This is a great paint, very opaque, and you can see how quickly that goes on, very opaque, and it will settle very quickly. Just using normal Mr. Colour thinner here, but it's really just a job of a couple of minutes with a paint this good. It'll dry glossy, and it's just a really nice paint to use. So it's just working over all these interior areas, the interior of the wheel bays, the intake ramps, all that sort of area. So you can see that's both of the areas where the actual wheel locates in the wheel bay. There's things like the intake ramps here and the inside of the main undercarriage well, the sort of area where the legs sit, and the side walls of where the wheel will sit. But hopefully you can see how good this paint is. Just reasonably well thin, but not too thin. And over this colour plastic, it goes on very nicely and very quickly. This entire job, all the white painting you're seeing me do here, took no more than about 7 or 8 minutes, I wouldn't think. And then we're actually ready to hopefully move on to doing some some glue, well, some main assembly. Intakes, same thing, just using what was left in the cup. And then the inside of the actual intake trunking and the exhaust tubes, afterburner tubes there, they all need to be white as well prior to further weathering being done. And then we can think about the wash in those areas. I wanted something that wasn't too dark, too obtrusive, and I find that mixing these two colours, Tamiya's brown and grey, gives a colour very similar to Starship Filth from MiG, which is great. Just thinned a little bit with some low odour thinner. And then it's just using a fine brush, and I'm just using it as a pin wash in and around all the detail in the wheel bays. And things like that, just to give them a little. I don't want them to look, you know, absolutely minging. I just want them to be a little bit dirty, and have the details stand out. So you can see that's just going on as a pin wash there. I'm not roughly brushing it over all the surfaces. I just want it to run in and around the detail in the wells there. And you can see how the gloss paint helps that to wick along the panel detail. Keeping it quite sharp. It's not diffusing out into a matte paint like it would if this was a flat finish. That would kind of paint would diffuse out into that, which is not always a bad thing. Sometimes you want that. On this particular model, I just want it to be quite sharply delineating all the detail, all the panel detail and stuff. You can see how easily it runs along there. You do have to keep stirring the paint a little bit as you go, just to make sure you keep the pigment mixed in with the thinner. Must work on keeping it in view more. And then finally the nose wheel bay just receives a little wash. So this is just starting to paint the interior here, and this is just a mixture of Mr. Colour H317, which is FS36231 dark gold grey, and GX112 gloss. It's just to give a slightly glossy surface to the paint as it goes on the interior, which will help when I apply a wash and things in the next step. Thinned with straight Mr. Colour leveling thinner, and no great mystery here. There's no secrets. I'm just applying a good opaque base coat of the paint just to make sure that everything is covered, and that will include making sure you include the side panels which go on before the interior is glued in place, and the instrument panels. Just make sure you include everything in that when you're spraying to make sure you don't have to go back later and remix and spray bits you might have missed. Ask me how I know. But yeah, as you can see, it's in 70 these interiors are fairly small. So the plan is to use the decals on this, as it's for the hobby company. Use what the kit provides if it's good enough, and the decals are actually pretty nice. So we'll see how that goes. So this is where we're going to start weathering the interior parts, and as you can see, I'm just using a mixture of Winsor & Newton Payne's grey and white there to make a dark bluish grey. As opposed to the wheel bays, this is more of a sludgy sort of a wash where I'll cover all of the detail and all of the surfaces with this, with a view to sort of removing all the excess and leaving a kind of slightly dirty finish, but one that the entire surface of the interior is sort of got a light staining effect on. But this colour being a bit darker and a bit bluer than the gold grey, it really helps to pop the detail out, which will help with the painting and the application of decals later on. So yeah, you can see there it's just an overall coat, the whole thing. I mean, it's not flooded on, but it is fairly liberally applied. And then what we're going to do is switch to a thin, a small flat brush there, and it's just removing all the excess and wiping the excess away on a piece of tissue. You can see how much of that's being removed in this shot here. So certainly the majority of what you've put on will end up being removed, but it does leave a nice stained finish to that slightly satin glossy interior colour that I've already got. And it gives a good basis for starting to detail paint, you know, things like the joysticks and things like that. And just removing the excess there from the little side panels that will glue in place before the interior goes in. And the intakes, what you find is you'll jump and skip about a bit with the initial assembly to get everything together where it needs to be. So this is me dealing with the intakes and the sprue attachment points and just smoothing the little insides of the intakes out. The kit includes masks because it's a strange shape inside the intake of the Tomcat that requires masking if you're doing like a TPS scheme. So the masks aren't die cut, but they are very nicely drawn out. And they are very accurate. So if you just cut them like this before application, there's 3 parts to each intake to create the odd shape of masking on the intake. In fact, if I'm honest, I stopped using a ruler because it's such a small area that you can use a fresh knife blade, and just if you're pulling the knife blade, it stays pretty straight. So that's going around the curve freehand there. And as long as the line is marked, you'll stay within a fraction of a millimetre of where you need to be. And it's the same with the straight lines, so don't worry too much about it. So using a fine pair of tweezers to lift those up, and then it's just a case of follow the instructions. These are all listed, so follow the instructions to apply those to the intakes. And then we're starting to paint the areas inside the intakes that need to be the TPS colour. In this case it's Mr. Colour 308, which is FS36375, so that's just the inside of the intake ramps being painted there. And there you go, you can see the difference between the white and the grey now with that masking taken off. And then we're painting the inside of the actual intakes. You can see the masked areas there, which again, like I say, follow the instructions and they fit pretty much perfectly. And then with them done, you can just peel the masking away to reveal a pretty much perfectly painted division line between the white and the ghost grey there. So back to black, and yeah, you can see the odd shape of the interior division line there and how well the kit masks have dealt with it. So this is a point where we're ready to start actually gluing the main airframe together. So this is the rear, the main fuselage part, the pancake as it were. So what I've done is I've run a cotton bud soak with Mr. Colour thinner along that join just to remove any paint that's on the join so it doesn't interfere with the actual gluing. And now I'm just running some slightly thickened super glue along the join lines. It doesn't have to be massively heavy, but just a really, you know, a good decent coat along the join line each side. So I'm gluing this in sections, so this will be the forward section glued first. And this is super glue has been used along all the joins where I actually need to hide a seam line when we get to the finished product. For other areas I will use Tamiya extra thin or extra thin quick setting depending on the job. But with those in, so there's a couple of little pins there as well that need doing. So that's the glue on there, and then it's just a case of adding the lower fuselage part to it, like so, clamping it, holding it with your fingers, and then what I'll do is I'll run some accelerator along that gap, or along that joint I should say. That's now set in place. I'll do the same on the other side. And that's that set in place too. Just make sure when you do this, I'm just adding a little bit of accelerator to all of them, all of the joins. So all I'm doing here is trimming off the excess super glue. So that little shaving you can see come off there is not plastic, it's actually super glue that had oozed out of the joint and has been set with the accelerator. What this means is that when you come to sand, you just absolutely minimise the amount of sanding you have to do. And then it's a piece of a skinny sanding stick using the rough end first. I suspect this is around 400 grit. But it just means that this piece of sanding is absolutely minimised, so you're not massively over sanding, removing detail and all that sort of thing. That's the join line, largely sort of camouflaged, hidden. Just make sure that you don't sand any flats on, so keep working it into the radius, and then switching to the smoother side. Then I'll repeat that on the other side. Just checking that there's no actual seam still there. This is fine. And then sort of 1000 grit Infini sander, sanding sponge used just to polish that up, and 1000 grit is plenty sufficient for the kind of colour schemes we're going to be doing. Just adding the rear parts that go outside the donut panel, the fairings that are behind the ailerons on this aircraft. This is one part that didn't fit as perfectly as it could have done, I found. A little bit of trimming might have helped, but all I did in the end, use some of that thick super glue again, drop the part in place. It does drop in place nicely because there's plenty of little locating tabs and stuff. So just located that part in place onto that, that slightly thick super glue, then ran thin super glue, very thin super glue in around the inside of the joint, which will just lock it all into place. Like I say, there was a join here, which is one of the only areas on the kit I've found that there's actually a visible join so far, but it is level, so that will be just a super glue filling job, and very light trimming and sanding later on, so no big deal, but it is worth noting. And then the intake lips, which have different ECM attachments depending on the variant, so you can see that just drops in place, and when I add the glue you'll actually see it pull in. It just pulls straight in, and the fit is just absolutely perfect. That will require nothing except a little swipe with Scotch-Brite just to remove any glue marks. So just move around and make sure it's all glued into place with the extra thin, and that is that for them. The fit is just absolutely perfect. Just checking there. So the tail parts for the F-14D, it's completely separate to allow other variants. And I did find it didn't sit right down as flat as it could, so I'm just using a Madworks chisel here just to scrape a little bit away from the mounting ledge. It was literally 30 seconds work to do this, just to help that part drop right into place. Don't take anything off of the mating face, only the base where it sits. And then some Tamiya white cap cement is used behind the actual mating faces, around some of the pins and stuff, just to hold that part in place, as it were, because it's a very loose fit. So that'll just hold that part in place long enough there for me to run some more extra thin Tamiya extra thin quick setting around the gap. And again, you'll see that it will pull in, and that join all but disappears as you apply the cement to it. Again, one of those fantastic fits. Just be careful if you're adjusting that you don't squeeze any glue out the joint. You want it to look like a panel line. And then the very rear of the tail part, the kind of beaver tail, as it were, I just tacked that in place. And the fit here was so good that when I went to glue the top side, I actually had to hunt for a second or two to find out where the joint was. And then again, as is becoming standard, little drop of Tamiya extra thin quick setting, and that's that job done. So this is just dealing with those small fairings around the rear, where they join the donut panel for the jet pipes. I've already done one, so this is just going to show you what I'm doing with the second one. So as I said, the fit isn't perfect on this, so it is one of those areas, the only areas that really needs any attention as such. So I'm just using some slightly thickened super glue and running it around the join there. It's good to use slightly thickened super glue. It runs into the join quite nicely, but it doesn't. You don't lose control of it. I do use very thin super glue on some jobs, but you've got to be really careful with it because it will flood around stuff very quickly. This requires a little bit less vigilance, shall we say. But yeah, that's just adding that around that join there, and then what I'll do is I'll use a little dab of accelerator on it. Little micro brush there used to apply the plastic safe accelerator. I tend to buy these in packs of about 1,000 at a time from Temu or AliExpress or whatever, where it's a couple of quid for a few hundred of them, because I can rattle through these on a build. Same with cotton buds, get on with cotton buds from there these days. And then it's just using that small number 15 blade there, and as you've seen me do on other areas of this this particular assembly, all I'm doing is just trimming away the excess super glue very carefully. You know, if you start removing plastic, as long as the parts are level, if you start removing plastic, you've gone too far. So this is just trimming off the super glue, nothing more. And then it's switching to a little piece of sanding stick there. And like I say, most of the trimming means that there's very little sanding to be done, so you're going to lose a minimum of detail around this part. And don't be afraid to chop your sanding sticks up. Quite often you see the people are using the end of a sanding stick. The middle never seems to get used for much, so chop them up into small, easily handled bits like this. They last much longer, and you get much better use out of them. And if it wears off at the end, I just use a pair of snips or scissors, just chop the end a few millimeters off, and it kind of reveals almost a fresh edge to start again with. So what will happen with this is, once this is done, there probably will be some detail that needs restoring here in terms of a little bit of rescribing. Excuse me. But the overall finish and fit of the plastic is so good that it's difficult to see just where it needs to, detail will need to be restored. So a very light coat of primer will be put over these parts, which will really highlight any areas where detail has been lost and needs restoring. I don't suspect there will be much on this particular model, and a lot of this, what you're seeing here, will be hidden beneath the tailerons and stuff anyway. So I never waste time on joins and stuff where it's not going to be visible. So that's just the bottom of that that little panel that needed dealing with as well. So I can quite often deal with different portions of a join individually. It stops you dealing with too much sort of super glue in one go and finding it's getting harder as you go on, because this stuff really does harden by the minute, especially if you accelerate it. So at the moment it feels quite like trimming plastic itself. Give it an hour and it'll be sort of coming off far more like in flakes rather than trimming like plastic. Very careful. Again, like I say, if you're removing plastic, you've gone too far. And it's just working down through the grits, so get the majority of it done there. You can see the total area I'm sanding there is only a few millimetres. Then the lighter grit there, just to bring it all together. And I will use another, like 1,000 grit or so, just to polish it up. But that's plenty for these sorts of joins. And then it's just adding the intake trunks, which have had the insides. You know, the actual intake tunnels and stuff added. Again, I mean, the fit is as good as fit gets on models. So Tamiya extra thin quick setting, just run in along the joins. I know people say you should use capillary action, but I quite often find that this stuff goes off so quickly that actually brushing it, using a well-loaded brush and brushing it along the join physically, it just makes certain of it. And then there's these little panels that go in. Obviously there's separate ones for TF30 engines that no doubt will be coming along, but this just deals with the F-110 specific intakes and vents and stuff on this portion. Again, see the fit. I suspect that although if you run a finger over it you can feel a very slight sort of ridge there, it's going to be completely invisible under paint, so that will be pretty much all I do with this. Let it dry and then just press it in, and that's largely this portion of the airframe done, except for minor details. So we're moving on to the forward fuselage and cockpit and stuff next, so stay tuned. So one of the few areas where this kit actually needs filler is on the wing underside, where the join line goes through the flap. It's not a big deal, it just takes a little bit of, I used Tamiya's basic filler here, and then it's just a piece of 800 grit wet and dry to sand the excess filler away. That's been left to dry for a couple of days because I've been doing other stuff. I always try to do this wet, it just helps to clear the sanding sort of dust and sludge, makes the wet and dry cut much better and much smoother. So if you can, I always recommend wet sanding things, and it's just keep going back and going over this. This is basically, you're watching this in real time here. So prior to this I'd sanded the join there just to see if it would blend in. It wasn't perfect, so a little bit of filler was used, and like I say, just a little sliver of 800 grit wet and dry used wet. I do tend to have a little bit of washing up liquid in there as well, just again it helps. The wet and dry, it helps to clear all the grinding or sanding sludge, as it were. And like I say, every few seconds just stop, wipe away the excess, see where you are. And what you generally tend to find is if the join is level, there's no step or anything, what you're going to end up with is very, very little filler left by the time you've sanded. And it's just basically going to be around any unevenness or in the actual, any gap that was left itself. So we're almost there now. And you might have to restore the flap line there, the flap division line, with a scriber or similar. I just pulled a scriber through it once, and that was fine. But like I say, because this is camouflage, the 800 grit is about as fine as you need to go. I will give it a little bit of a rub over with Scotch-Brite just to remove any little greeblies or anything. But this job was done in real time, so you've watched me sand this away in real time, and that's how much work it takes. Not the end of the world, is it? And then the strakes on the underside, on some aircraft these are a different colour, they fit perfectly, so if they are a different colour to the rest of the airframe, you can sort of leave them aside and paint them separately and put them in. These are the same colour as the underside, so I just popped them in place and used a bit of Tamiya's extra thin linen cement, run along the joins there, and that will just make that perfect. No further work needed, perhaps a little rub over with a Scotch-Brite afterwards. And then sort of around this area, the arrestor hook comes with its fairing. Now I wanted to apply the fairing because that's the same colour as the underside, but I want to paint the actual hook and its mechanism separately. So I just took a razor saw and sawed the hook and the mechanism away from the fairing. A little bit of cleaning up and that'll just pop into place at the end of assembly when it's been painted separately. So it's just cleaning up, and then again a little drop of that extra thin linen to drop the fairing in place itself. And that's basically the area behind the forward fuselage finished now. So apart from a few little bits with Mr. Surfacer, we're ready to carry on. And this is putting the decals on. I decided to use the decals for the consoles and instrument panels on this. They're perfectly matched to the actual relief detail because they're the kit parts. So I'm just dropping them in place, but I'm not actually pressing them down too hard at this point. Just letting them hover over the surface, and then a tiny little bit of dabbing with a moist cotton bud. Make sure it is a little bit wet so you don't risk catching like the decal sticking to it. And then it's working around all of the panels, doing that. And then we're using Dayco's extra strong decal setting solution here, which you can't find anymore, I don't think. I haven't seen it for a long time, and I'm down to my last few drops. What I'm doing with those is I'm just going to run it under the decal, but not over the top at the moment. So just, as you see here, just at the periphery, just so it runs under the decal, and that will soften the underside of the decal and the varnish and stuff. But I don't want it over yet, because what I don't want to happen is the decal to be softened and stick to the cotton bud, because the next operation will involve a little bit more pressure, which sort of increases the risk of the decal sticking to the cotton bud. So you can see it wicking straight under and going all around, and then give it a minute or two to start softening. And then I'm using the pointed end of a moistened cotton bud here just to start gently easing it into place. Don't go overboard at this point. All you're trying to do is get the decal settled into where it needs to be and start conforming to the detail. And it's just working around all four of those consoles. The decaling on the cockpit will be done in multiple stages, because there's another bunch of decals to go on there yet. And then I'll start the actual detail painting against the grey and the weathered cockpit. And then after another couple of minutes, the pressure's increasing a little bit, just to start forcing them in, and then what I will do then is I'll then apply the setting solution or the softening solution over the top of the decal, but I won't be touching it. And there's the start of this. You can see the main decals there, the main instrument panels there. The decals are just sitting on top now. The softener is working on the underside of those, and that's it for the decals at this stage. So we're ready to glue the forward fuselage halves together now. I've painted and detailed the cockpit interior. There's still some little bits to be done there, but it's basically complete. What can be done is accessible after the fuselage halves are together. So I'll be using super glue for this, which you can just see me applying some slightly thickened super glue around the join lines there. I've cleared it of paint, so there's going to be no paint interfering with the join. This just means that you can avoid any ghost seams appearing subsequently if you use super glue. Using normal cements, often you'll get a ghost seam appear many months later. This just avoids that completely. So just running around the join there, applying super glue. And then the interior just drops straight into place. There's a couple of pegs and pins and holes for it to locate into, so it locates dead accurately. And then the fuselage half just clips into place, just lining it up and then squeezing the join together so the super glue squeezes out the join. Then as soon as it's gripped, a little bit of accelerator on a micro brush just around that join to immediately set it. And then with that, what I'm using here is a ceramic scalpel blade to just carve the excess super glue away, trim it away very gently. It'll just really minimise the amount of sanding you have to do on this join. The join is flat and level, so it's no big deal. And what you can see coming off there, that shaving coming off, is just super glue. There's no plastic on that. The join is pretty much flat and level, so no super glue. Sorry, no plastic being removed there. So just going around all the joins here with that ceramic knife and trimming away the excess super glue. It's still quite plastic at this point, so easy to trim and cut. And then the usual bit of sanding stick, just running around the join. Make sure you don't sand any huge flats on it. So it's just keep it moving with the curve of the fuselage there, and sand that join flat, not flat, rounded, but you know what I mean. Bad choice of words. But yeah, you can see that most of them, because I've actually carved away most of the super glue very carefully, it doesn't require much sanding, and then just switching to the smoother side with the foam backing, so you can see that sort of going around the contour there, and just sanding that join so it's getting rid of most of the scratches. A little bit of 3M sanding sponge there, just to make sure it's perfectly smooth. So you can see all my sanding is a multi-part process. You use 3 or 4 different abrasives and grits to get to where you need. And then there's a little panel line in front of the canopy area there, the rear of the nose cone. It's a curved panel line that needs to be restored. And the actual line is very fine, so just running a scalpel blade around that line a couple of times to restore that will be more than adequate, I think. I will check when I get to the priming stage, but I think that's going to be more than adequate. And then just a little bit of sanding with the 3M superfine sanding sponge there. And then finally a very little polish with some Scotch-Brite. And there you go, that's a seam that will not show up subsequently. So there's a couple of panels on the underside here. This is one in the nose. What I'm doing is applying super glue to deep enough into that join that when I drop the panel in place, it'll push the super glue inside the fuselage, any excess, rather than making it squeeze out, is the plan. and then just checking that the forward area of the nose bay where it locates is flat and smooth, and there's no minimal paint on it, so it's going to settle exactly where it should. And then that just gets dropped in place like so. Boom. Just push it in. The super glue will grip very, very quickly, and that's about as perfect a join as you get. Run a little bit of liquid glue around it and job's done. And then the rear panel there with the Sparrow bays is the same. This is using extra thin quick setting here. Now, were I to do this again, I probably wouldn't join the rear just there where I'm indicating there and applying glue there. I probably wouldn't do that next time round. I would leave that free floating so that when it joins onto the rear fuselage, I've got a little bit of play there, because it did have a little bit of a step there when I joined it to the rear fuselage. It's not a big deal, it's well hidden, but just for future reference, were I to do this kit again, I would not glue that end in. Hello guys, this is just a bit of almost future me, but not quite. Just to let you know, I did film the joining of the forward to the rear fuselage, but somehow my file got corrupted. That somehow, I think, me being an idiot, walking away, leaving it recording without turning off, it promptly filled the card up and cut the camera off, and that corrupted the files, so I can't recover them. I've tried various methods of recovering them, various pieces of software, and the files appear to be thoroughly gone. So this is just to let you know, I did add the forward to the rear fuselage, which you can see there. I'll just bring you in a second. So there's a very long tongue here, and what I did was I applied super glue around the tongue on the part, and then around the inside of the matching part of the fuselage on the upper. The idea being that when you push that in, any super glue will then be pushed back away from the join rather than into the join, because what I didn't want was super glue sort of bubbling out of the actual join, which is the actual join, which is down here. I wanted that to be a distinct join, which I could deal with if I wanted to, or ignore. So that was then held in place, and then using my patented holding a small brush in my mouth with some accelerator on it, I just ran some accelerator along the join to set it in place. With that, once that was firmly in place, I then ran some very thin super glue, some stuff like this. Hopefully you can see. How thin that is. Using that nozzle there, some of that was just ran very gently into that join there, which then ran into the join. That was set with the accelerator itself, and then all the other areas around the intake join and stuff here and here, I just used some extra thin laminin cement to run some glue along them to set it in place. So this join is now thoroughly joined. The join here is pretty much perfect. I will apply some primer next just to check. There's a very, very small step between the front portion here and the rear portion here, which is why I said, were I to do this again, this belly pan part here with the forward Sparrow recesses, I would leave the rear part of that sort of free floating so I could locate it after I've joined the forward to the rear fuselage. But other than that, there wasn't really a lot to say. That was just, it was particularly annoying because I did film me doing all that, including the brush in the mouth, applying of accelerator, and subsequently lost it. So sorry about that. So it's more of a visual and well, showing you and a verbal description of what I did, but there was nothing special about it. It's annoying, but you didn't really miss much. So sorry about that. But there we go, these things happen. So we're back after the failed video. Again, apologies for that. And what we're doing is I've given all of the seam lines that I've had to have some attention a very light coat of one of the base greys, in this case 36375. It's just to give it a bit of a check over, just to check for any seam lines. The Tomcat is a very complicated shape, and a lot of seam lines tend to catch you out if you're not careful. So we've got some areas like this area where that panel had to drop in earlier, where it's not a gap as such, but the glue hasn't filled the gap in. That tail there looks pretty much perfect. This one here has got one or two little very small gaps that will need a little bit of filling. Overall, the sides here where it had to be sanded is fine. The gap, or I should say the join where the tail, the beaver tail glued on, looks exactly like a panel line. If you didn't know, and I showed you this kit, you wouldn't know that was a separate part. So moving forward, we've got the wing gloves here. There's a little bit of an issue there that will need a little bit of sanding, a little bit of a gap here. Other side looks pretty good. The area where the forward part of the intake lips went on is perhaps a tiny little bit of filling there, but nothing much. It's just working over. So we got the join from the front to the rear fuselage here. Again, I think with just a bit of a coat of paint, this is going to look just like a panel line. There's a tiny little bit of a gap on the spine. It's just an indication of how good this kit is overall, really, that we're picking up tiny little issues like this. So the nose join there, as you remember, that was done with super glue. That join is absolutely perfect. There's absolutely nothing showing there in terms of a seam, which is exactly what we want. And the restoration of the panel line around the radome there looks fine. Same with the underside. There's a tiny little bit of a seam showing there. I'm just going to show you. So a little bit of sanding with a 3M superfine sponge, and that's that dealt with. Polish it up. So basically we're working around doing all these sorts of things. This area here where this panel dropped in is again pretty much perfect. Along here, the area where that belly panel with the Sparrow missiles drops in, pretty much perfect. At the rear here, as I've highlighted several times, it wasn't perfectly flat, and that's why I said in future I'll glue this end in, but not that end, until the front and rear are joined, and then I can make sure that the join is level. Having said that, it is very, very minor indeed. If you look at it from sort of this angle, you can't see there's an issue. If you look at it from this angle, you can see that there's a very slight step there. Now, you could trim this like I'm doing here, very gently. But honestly, you're hardly ever going to see it from that angle. So it's really a case of, is this just diminishing returns really? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give it a light polish over with this here. Basically it's going over all of the seams. So I'm just going to look at the seams that could do with a little bit of sanding first. And like I say, there was a little bit of a mismatch there. And again, I can see you catch it in the light right, and you can see where your sanding maybe hasn't, you know, your finishing hasn't been as perfect as you might have hoped the first time round. But if that happens, it's only really going to show up under a coat of primer. So prime it and check your seams. So then all I'm going to do is the curved blade is great for laying this stuff in, because you can kind of use the curve of the blade to almost roll the filler into the join, if you understand what I mean by that. So there's a tiny little gap here, and this gap is on the panel line. So what I don't want to do is actually remove the panel line, if that makes sense. I just don't want it to look like there's a complete gap there. I want it to look like a panel line. And if you apply Mr. Surfacer, let it dry, then wipe away the excess, you'll tend to still leave a depression now which looks like the panel line. Now, I did notice on one of these overwing bleed air outlets here, there was a tiny bit where it hadn't quite filled completely, and it's the same with this bit here. There's a little bit there, but I don't want to remove detail or have that become invisible. I still want it to be visible, so I'll just do that and let it dry, and then removing the excess will be fine. And so we're just removing the majority of the black Mr. Surfacer here using a cotton bud soaked in Mr. Colour thinner. And the idea is, like previously mentioned, what I want to do is remove all the stuff from the surface and leave a visible line there, just one that isn't actually a see-through gap, if that makes sense. It's been drying for a couple of days. I've been doing other stuff, so it requires a little bit of work, but after sort of 15 or 20 seconds of rubbing with the Mr. Colour thinner soaked cotton bud, it'll start coming away, and then you can gently sort of polish that seam up, and then change to the clean end and just see how you're doing. And then just a light polish up with another cotton bud at the end, just to make sure all the excess thinner and stuff is removed. I will prime that seam again just to check how it's doing, but that is for that. That's as simple as that. Now, some of the other areas, like on this wing glove here, where the wing seal's gone in place, I actually want to sand that away just to make sure it's all flat and level. So you're just picking the method to suit the actual part. So this is just a light sand and polish. It's not enough to remove any detail. And then on areas like this join on the vertical tail here, I do actually want to hide that seam. I want that seam to be invisible. So this is actually a little bit more involved in terms of the sanding and stuff. It's just a byproduct of the way the kit goes together. It's not a fault in the kit or anything like that. It's just that there is a seam there, and I need that to be invisible. So that was filled as with the rest a couple of days ago with some Mr. Surfacer 1500, and been allowed to set for a couple of days. Hopefully it's outgassed enough that there won't be any ghost seams in the future, and it's just a light sanding. You can see I'm just using the sponge side of this piece of sanding stick. I'm not actually using the rough side at all because it doesn't need it. And just a little bit of sanding just to hopefully completely camouflage that seam. And so I want to get the windscreen in place now, and so what I want to do is a little bit of dry brushing on those areas with some of this Ammo medium grey paint, just to pop the detail before the windscreen goes in place. And so it's just using a brush with most of the paint removed and just brushing in that circular motion and stuff like that. Just basically getting the dry brush in there as well as you can. And I might as well do the rest of the canopy sill and stuff while I'm here. And it's just popping all that detail that's on that canopy sill and rails and stuff. And so the canopy that was removed and had central portion painted earlier is now ready to be fitted. Fit is really nice. It does require a little bit of pressure at the rear. And all I'm doing is using a little bit of Tamiya extra thin rapid setting, just wicked into the join. The join is well away from the actual clear part itself, so there's minimal risk here of having any issues. But it just requires a tiny little bit of pressure, especially at the back, just to keep it in place while it begins to set. You'll see me using a brush here to do this rather than the inbuilt brush in the bottle. I prefer this because I find that the ledge above the brush can sometimes have a lot of glue on it, which will suddenly wick out and absolutely flood the join. So for jobs like this, with using Tamiya's cements, I much prefer to use a brush where you don't have that large ledge above the actual brush itself, which can sometimes retain a lot of glue that then floods a join. It's just an FYI and something to think about if you're going to use this kind of glue for canopies. And that is it. The fit is more or less perfect. I will obviously, as I previously said and reiterated, I will prime this just to check, but just holding that canopy in place or the windscreen in place for a few seconds until the glue grips is all that's required. So we're moving to the main canopy here. I'm just clipping it away. I'm just clipping apart of that protection structure just to make sure it makes it easier to remove. A few tiny little, there's a moulding gates there, one on the leading edge of the canopy bow and two on the underside. They just snip off. There's quite a lot of detail on this canopy, especially on the inside, which would traditionally have been added separately. This is all moulded in this kit. And then it's just a case of gently cleaning up. Now what you'll see me using here is a ceramic blade. And the reason I like using a ceramic blade for this, it's only recently I've got this, is I tend to find that ceramic blades are very, very stiff, which means that when you're cutting and scraping, you don't get any chatter. So you don't get any roughness in a finish caused by chatter. They're as sharp as any other scalpel blade. But like I say, they're just that little bit thicker and sturdier. They're very brittle, so you don't want to drop them or anything like that. But just a gentle scrape is all that's needed to clean up. And so being a 210 degree sort of omega shaped canopy, there is a central mould line that needs to be removed on this. Again, I'm using this ceramic blade to do this because again there's absolutely no chatter on it, so it's just really nicely removing that panel or that seam line. And all it requires is a very, very gentle scraping to remove that seam line. And so with the scraping done, I'm moving to a sanding sponge here. This is an old Flory Models one, no longer available, but it's got a medium grit on one side and a very, very fine grit on the other side. So I'm just using that, just going over that seam line. And then with that done, we switch to the other side, which is really an ultra fine grit. This is the kind of thing where you can actually hear the plastic squeaking because it's so fine, but you're trying to get that as clear as possible. Just make sure there's no marks left in the clear plastic. If there are, and you need to go back and use a slightly coarser grit, go back and do it. Keep repeating this process till you've got the result that you're actually looking for. And so this is just going backwards and forwards until I'm happy that I've restored the contour and there's no scratches or anything left in the clear parts. And so the final step is using Tamiya's ceramic compound just on some cotton buds and some tissue, and it's just polishing that seam line away, polishing any sort of marks left there using this ceramic compound. So again, the Tomcat canopy, very big, very clear, so you need to be taking your time and really focusing on getting this as clear and as blemish free as possible. I expect to go through a few cotton buds. I change them quite frequently when I'm doing this, just to make sure that they're actually staying clean and they're not actually adding scratches rather than removing them. And if you do this, there's absolutely no need really for anything like a clear coat or anything like that over the canopy. You will polish it up to absolute crystal clarity quite quickly. And then just a final little polish with some tissue, just to remove all the any dried off ceramic compound and see how the clarity looks. And that's canopy done. It took 5 or 10 minutes to do this canopy. It's a very small seam to remove. And one thing with a Tomcat canopy is there is an antenna on the inside of the canopy on both the front and rear crew areas. That is a detail on the inside of this canopy, so if it looks like there's a seam left, there isn't. There is a detail on the inside of the canopy which needs to remain there, and I will include a picture of that area just to show you what I mean. So don't be alarmed, that is supposed to be there. So with the windscreen in place and any sanding, some very light sanding needed but not much, it's time to mask. And the kit does include a sheet of masks. They're not pre-cut, but they are very accurately marked out, and they're very easy to cut with a with like a fresh number 11 blade, and they fit absolutely perfectly. So that's just taking those parts, cutting those parts out. Like so. There are various ways of cutting around the radiuses, the radii I should say, in the corners. I just tend to follow it round like so, with the very tip of a really sharp. I find an X-Acto blade is good for this rather than a Swan Morton. It's a bit thinner and it's a bit more flexible, which makes it really good for this kind of cutting job. And makes it very easy to follow these curved lines. And lifts out, you can see that there's a little arrow in the corner of each to show which direction it should face forward, so it automatically sort of tells you where it's going to go and which side it goes on, and then it's just a case of lining it up with the clear panel and dropping it in place. The kit also includes masks for the exterior of the main canopy, but not the interior. Now there's some detail on the interior, I wanted to paint that. So in order to mask the interior, what you see me using here are some of the high-Q parts masks for circles. These are about 1.5 millimeters in diameter. I'm just putting them in the corner of each part of the clear inside canopy, so you can see the actual panel sort of clear division line through the canopy to help you locate that. So it's just putting that, so you're going to use 8 of these for all 4 corners of both clear sections. And then you're going to join each of those little dots with some normal Tamiya masking tape here. I'm using a Hasegawa tri-tool curve just to cut a curve very close to the actual curve of the canopy line. A lot of people cut a straight piece of tape and then bend it to conform, but if you can make it curved to start with, roughly where it should be, why not do that? And so it's just taking pieces of this curved tape, cut to length, and patching it in to join up the join the dots, as it were, on the inside of the canopy. I mean, really not difficult. It can be a bit fiddly, I suppose, sometimes, but it's really not difficult to do this. And you're just sort of finagling it into place, really, with the dots, and pushing it down, move on to the next bit, and move around the inside of the canopy, joining the dots. And then with all of those dots joined and the interior masked, I just filled in the remainder with some masking fluid. And there you go. That's the complete interior of the main canopy now masked. So what we'll do now is we'll let that dry, and then we'll go back and we'll mask the exterior using the kit supplied masks. So the exterior masks are also provided on the sheet, and it's just a case of, like I say, with this X-Acto flexible new number 11 blade, just working around very carefully and cutting them out. The lines are very, very accurate, so if you cut them out and follow the lines as close as you can, you'll end up with very, very well fitting masks. It doesn't matter how accurate you are on the interior, really, because there's a large piece of masking to go over it, but the lines are there, so we'll follow them reasonably closely. Again, there's a little arrow there to tell you what's the front. So you're taking this piece off. This is one of the forward canopy parts, and then you just locating it along the line. You know, you might have to be a little bit careful. You might have to reposition it once or twice, as you can see me doing here. And then just pushing it around the curve there, and then just making sure it's all bedded in nicely. And then there's a nice piece of tape there to cut out and apply to the centre of the area you've just masked to completely mask the canopy. You could do this with liquid mask as well, but the you know, the masks are on the sheet, so why not use them? And that's our canopy, basically completely masked. It's just remains to go over all the seams, all the edges, I should say, and just burnish them down to make sure they're thoroughly in place. And that's your canopy masked. Just using a little brush there to push it down, stiff little flat brush to push it down, and the back of the brush as well, just making sure it's all the edges are burnished right down to seal them in. And then using some Mr. Colour 137 Tire Black to just paint the inside of the canopy frame there. Like I say, there's a little bit of detail on there, the canopy locks and stuff, which is quite nicely rendered. So painting this will give you a chance to dry brush and weather those areas, and make it look pretty good, really, considering it's, you know, straight from the box. Just thinned with normal Mr. Colour leveling, sorry, not even leveling thinner, just Mr. Colour thinner used here. And that's pretty much it. Just a quick coat over to make sure it's opaque, and we're ready to move on. And not forgetting to spray the windscreen with the tyre black as well, just to ensure that when the camouflage colour goes over the top, what you see from the inside is the black. And there you go. That's that done as well. So we're rapidly approaching the bit now where we can actually start applying paint to the model. I've gone over various bits and I'm primed and sanded. There's one or two little lines to be restored, but we're almost ready to start the painting phase. So I suspect this might well be pretty much the end of part 1. So I will see you in part 2.